I don't know if you guys will be able to hear this or not, but it should not sound like that. So this is a 2006, I believe, Chevy Trailblazer with a horrendously loud front wheel bearing. You could actually feel it vibrating or grinding under your feet on the driver's side on the test drive. One of the easiest ways to check for bad wheel bearing is just to give it a shakedown, a wiggle test. And you probably can't see or hear it, but there's play going this way, which could be a, it could be a tie rod end, and then there's play going this way, which could also be a ball joint, but I've checked, there's no movement in the ball joint, and there's no movement in the tie rod end. And on the test drive, it did sound like it was a driver's side wheel bearing. I could actually feel it in the floor. But this one's loose, so we're going to change it. If you're doing this at home with hand tools, it's important to loosen this nut up before you raise the vehicle up off the ground. I believe that's going to be a 35 millimeter. So take the dust cap off, loosen that nut up, loosen up your lug nuts, then lift the vehicle up, then remove the lug nuts. You're going to want to create some room inside the brake. I lost the audio, but basically just pry that caliper back a little bit just so you can get the brake shoes back over the rust ridge. You can do it by just grabbing the bottom of that rotor, and just pulling out on it like that. These are the two bolts that you'll want to remove, and this will remove the whole caliper with the bracket. These are 18 millimeter. This is just a little bracket that holds the speed sensor wire and the brake hose in place. It's important to remove it to make some slack in the line. The bolts are 10 millimeter on that. There's two of them. Okay, go steal an S-hook off one of your bungee cords, one of your black rubber bungee cords. These work great for hanging. I always keep one of those S-hooks in my tool cart just for that purpose of hanging calipers, so you don't hang it from the hose. Okay, next we're going to want to unhook the electrical connector for the speed sensor. If you haven't already, loosen and remove this 35 millimeter axle nut. You can see that my axle is already loose in there. If it wasn't, I would leave that nut on just like that and then hit this with a hammer a couple times. The nut protects the threads just to get the axle loose. But in this case, it's already loose. There are 3 bolts that hold this hub assembly to the steering knuckle. They come in from the back side, and these are the bolts protruding through the hub right down there. And it's a good idea to spray some rust penetrant on those. The bolts are 18 millimeter heads, and they come in from the back side. Again, I lost the audio. I don't know what I'm talking about here. Probably talking about how I can access 2 of the bolts with the steering knuckle turned to the left, and then we'll turn the steering knuckle to the right after those 2 bolts are removed to access the rearmost bolt. Oftentimes, after you remove the bolts, the hub is still stuck in the steering knuckle, and it's necessary to strike this with a hammer or bolt a hub buster onto it and hit the hub buster. But in this case, it came loose as soon as I pulled the last bolt out. Before you remove this from the vehicle, Take note of the orientation of the wire for the speed sensor as well as the splash shield, because if you put them on wrong, you'll hate yourself in the reassembly process. I don't know if you guys will be able to hear this or not, but it should not sound like that. Now, even though this bearing came out effortlessly, we still want to clean up the area before we put it back together. Here's our new Timken bearing. I'll put a link to this bearing down in the description of the video.
I'm not sure what happened, but I lost the rest of the video feed as well as the audio on this clip, but it was basically just me bolting the bearing back in. I'm sure you guys can figure that out.
With the brakes back together, we're going to put this little bracket back in place that holds the brake line as well as the wire for the ABS sensor. I waited to put this back in place so that I could route this wire correctly this time. Reinstall your electrical wire. Make sure that it has a good connection or else you'll get an ABS light. Install the axle nut and torque it to 103 foot-pounds. Thanks for watching, guys. If this video helped you out or you liked it, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe if you haven't already. Appreciate the support.